Energy costs are escalating across the globe amid severe shortages in major economies, including China. Gasoline and diesel retail prices are at a 7-year high, and winter fuel costs are expected to surge. For more, I have Professor Yi Yu-ho from Seoul National University. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you, Professor Yi.
Greetings.
I also have Professor Oh Jun-seok from Sookmyung Women's University. Good to have you with us again, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Professor Yi, we'll start with you then. Let's begin with a few words on the severity of the energy crisis that the globe is currently facing.
So more than half of China's provinces have been rationing electricity over the past weeks, and some provinces even experienced blackouts. In the meantime, September saw the industrial output declines for the first time since China started recovering from COVID-19 lockdowns. So in the UK, the gas prices have risen by 250% since January 2021, and over 70% in August alone. And the regulators of the UK caps how much consumers can be charged. So the pressure stays with the energy providers. As a consequence, several companies have gone out of business. So I think this is the worst energy crisis that China and the UK have recently faced in a decade.
Right. And Professor Oh, I believe the ripple effects of this energy crisis are being felt on the global economic arena as well. What more can you tell us?
Sonia raises a good question. Stock prices in Korea go lower this week due to the foreigners selling, and then amid concern over inflation sparked by origin prices of energy and oil and so on. And the China Evergrande crisis generate financial instability also, and then as a way to avoid uncertainty, foreign investors want to sell their older stocks from the Korean capital market, which means by changing the Korean won currency into US dollar currency. And as a result, that the Korean won fell against the US dollar, adding another financial instability. In economics, goods market and the financial markets are interconnected, and there are two types of inflation. One is demand pull, and the other one is cost push. Korean government to take the demand pull strategically, which is less painful than the cost push. So in the name of the disaster relief fund, that the Korean government want to try to inject liquidity into the economy to boost up the demand in a market. But nowadays, surprisingly, there is a symptom, there is a new sign of the cost push inflation, which is a kind of the tumor of economy, which means to decrease the investment and then employment altogether on a large scale. So eye-watering cost hike will reduce the production and then employment, then the price in the market goes upward faster and faster. So energy prices are major cost components, not of production, but of consumption as well. So producers have to increase their price due to the cost increase of energy. And then the consumer's viewpoint that consumers' disposable income is determined after paying the energy price first. We cannot bear the heat in summer, nor the coldness in winter. So it is fixed cost. So when energy prices stay high, it means it adds to the worries of the slowdown in global economic recovery.
Right, unfortunately, of course. Professor Yi, you mentioned the UK facing a petroleum shortage and China facing a coal shortage. Could you tell us a bit more about perhaps the reasons behind these respective shortages in these two countries, the UK and China?
Okay, so China is highly dependent on coal, which provides 70% of the country's power generation. And China's energy market is a regulated one in which the price of electricity is controlled by the government. So when the coal price increases, it does not make economic sense for coal power plants to keep supplying electricity unless the regulator increases the electricity price. So instead, the coal power plants can avoid generating a loss by claiming that they have a technical malfunction or by failing to purchase the core. And I think both of which happened in the run-up to the current crisis. And in the case of the UK, I think there's no simple short answer. The winter of last year, which was quite cold, actually put some increased demand on UK energy, having run down some gas stockpiles. And on top of that, extremely hot summer of this year put further pressure on the energy supply system of the UK. And the UK is suffering the energy crisis in particular compared to other European countries, and this makes us think about the UK specific causes for this energy crisis. And one of the key facts we need to know to understand the landscape of the UK energy supply is that it is heavily relying on the wind energy for its electricity. So it's about 25% of electricity of the UK is coming from the wind. And wind energy is great, but when it is not windy, it becomes almost useless. And the wind energy production is proportional to the wind velocity to the power of 3. So say that you get like 20% of a reduction of the wind speed, wind velocity, for instance, and this is quite frequently happens in the operation of the wind turbines. And say that you have 0.8 now, then a 0.8 velocity of your nominal velocity, which is 1, and taking power of 3 on that, you get like 0.5, which means you only get 50% of the energy that you originally intended to have. And the UK has been experiencing lack of wind this fall. So in summary, the heavy reliance on the coal of China in a regulated market distorted the landscape of the energy supply of the country, and the intermittent nature of the wind energy I think played some role in the run-up to the current crisis in the UK.
Right. And keeping in mind the current energy crisis then, Professor, some pundits are casting doubt, therefore, on the timing of efforts to ensure carbon neutrality. What are your thoughts on this?
I think decarbonization is an indisputable mission of our generation and after. But a more important question is how we do it. So I think every energy source has a niche. So fossil fuels are relatively easy to deploy and is scalable. However, fossil fuels emit carbons, and it introduces inherent vulnerability of the cost volatility, price volatility associated with the international geopolitics. And the renewable energy is an emission-free energy source. However, it is extremely surprisingly expensive, and also it is intermittent by nature, and most importantly, it is not scalable. So I think the nuclear energy is the only scalable decarbonizing energy source that we have. And I think we need to face it and take that into account for our energy planning.
Right. Meanwhile, Professor O, do you suppose now that the struggle for an upper hand or perhaps dominance in the international arena between the US and China may have perhaps aggravated the energy crisis?
Yeah, you also raised a good point. We already know that China's trade policy, known as PRI, Belt and Road Initiative, has transformed nowadays into the string of the pearl strategy, which encompasses the international trade and logistic network in the South China Sea. As a countervailing power, the United States, they has formed the Quad Diamond as a kind of the military defense alliance network connecting Hawaii, Japan, India, and Australia. Overlapping area is India and Australia. Think about it. India, Beijing is less harsh on India because of their colossal size. So in the sense that Australia is stuck between a rock and a hard place, and then its biggest trading partner is China. But there is a catch because Canberra craved to what I mean that security and the legitimacy it has from being allied with the United States and the West. So Beijing found Canberra meddlesome in the domestic affairs related with the Hong Kong and then related with the Taiwan and the South China Sea. So China launched a trade sanction against Australian products like wine, and then restrict import the beef and charcoal. That is the source of energy crisis. So in a cycle of escalating tension, it has shown that Beijing and Washington keep targeting each other, economic and military ambition. So Australia, already their country, could pay the price for being caught between these two geopolitical forces. That is why now Australia has become a big target in the middle of energy crisis.
Right. And staying with the energy crisis, now this is looking to be a hurdle for economic growth, and rising consumer prices are also a reality in many parts of the world. Therefore, Professor Oh, there are concerns over stagflation. What are your thoughts on this?
A main component of purchasing power is CING, consumption, investment, and then government expenditure. In Korea, we cannot rely on government expenditure anymore. So the rest is the consumption and then investment increase. But due to energy crisis, surprisingly at this time, dwindles consumption and investment altogether simultaneously on a broader scale in the Korean market. According to IMF economic outlook, it is high time to take a double check on the possibility of stagflation. Stagflation is when there is a high inflation with stagnant economic growth. So upward pressure on price could be larger and longer lasting than anticipated. Growing the power supply crunch in China also has cut the production at factories and triggered an eye-watering cost increase in energy. In spite of this, this is a wait-and-see situation, but we have to think more on the production shortage in China. We already know that China is called the factory of the world. When there happens a shortage of their production, it means that the production shortage in the world, which means all the prices will hike eventually. So we already know that the major economies are Korea's trade partner, which is a yearly effect against all the major countries. So what we're worried about now is that it is imminent, the pressure of the stagflation.
I see. And Professor Lee, what are your thoughts on the impact of the global energy crisis on Korea as we look ahead to the colder months of the season?
I think it is reasonable to anticipate an increase in energy price this winter in Korea. I'm speaking this because more than 80% of the Korean energy consumption is coming from fossil fuels, most of which are being imported.
I see. And Professor Oh, what more can you tell us now about the economic impact of the global energy crisis on Korea's economy now?
Yeah, Korea will be hit hardly by energy price hike afterward because it is a component of cost of production. But until recently, Korea has been on a recovery track on the back of robust export, but in front of eyes, plummeting consumption and investment in the export market. In terms of trade volume, 25% of Korean export goes to China, and then 15% goes to the United States. So in total, 40% of Korean export goes to either China or the United States. Commonly, they are in trouble and then under uncertainty. Think about it. In case of China, Chinese property developer Evergrande triggers the financial instability. 4.5 years make consumer confidence drop down. And then in the United States, a series of interest rate hike, which might be kind of interpreted as the press down the Black Friday sales performance at the end of this year. This will be a negative effect for Korea to keep up with the better performance in terms of export market in the last 3 months of the year.
Right. And back to you, Professor. So Korea relies on 80% of fossil fuels for its energy consumption. Having said that then, where does Korea stand now with regard to efforts to secure self-reliance? Because Europe's, for example, lack of energy and its reliance on Russia has highlighted the importance of being self-sufficient with regard to energy needs. Where does Korea stand?
So in modern society, I think energy is like the air we breathe, and you don't want to let other countries determine the supply of it. And considering the energy security of Korea, I think we are far from being independent, as more than 80% of our energy consumption is coming from fossil fuels. So, but an important fact that we need to be aware is that there is only so much that we can do about the energy security without consideration of nuclear power. Historically, the Korean nuclear power has been contributing to the nation's energy security without a single record of major accidents, and has successfully led the electricity price reduction since its first deployment in 1970s. And this is a part because the nuclear fuel cost, which essentially is the uranium cost, constitutes only 15% of the electricity price of the nuclear power. And that naturally means that nuclear power is tolerant against the price swings of uranium. And better yet, the international market of uranium is much more stable than that of fossil fuels. So also nuclear can effectively reduce the fossil fuel import from overseas, thereby making our country less dependent on the resources of foreign countries. And Korea is the country that can build the most safe nuclear power plant at the cheapest cost. And this is a proven record. And we need to cherish this technology and think about utilizing this as a backbone of the national security and production of cheap electricity, and perhaps the engine for the growth. And I think the current administrations of the nuclear phase-out policy is undermining the energy security of Korea, and I think it is neither strategic nor justifiable. So when it comes to also the decarbonization, I think global scale decarbonization without serious expansion of nuclear power is an impossible task. And I think people are increasingly aware of it. And I think we need to face it head on before it is too late.
Right. And staying with that, Professor, Korea last Friday spoke about raising its greenhouse gas emissions target to 40% by the year 2030. How feasible is this plan?
This can only be feasible if nuclear power portion can increase proportionally. So I think decarbonization is the mission of our generation and after. However, I think it's very important that we come up with a realistic plan to actually achieve the goal.
Right. Okay. Professor Lee, Professor O, this is the $1 million question. When will this energy crisis end?
Nobody knows, but we have to think about the situation, trade and diplomatic tension between China and Russia and the United States. Russia awake the role and status in the world, and then Russia, we already know that they are the main provider of natural gas in the European countries. And the wholesale price of gas has increased by 250% since January, triggering a knock-on spike in cost for consumers and businesses. Russia, one of Europe's biggest natural gas provider, has been accused intentionally withholding supplies. But it is expected that Russia will make the best use of natural gas and energy as a diplomatic and then economic leverage imposing power in the EU region. In this sense, that the energy crisis will be longer than expected, in line with Russia's another types of diplomatic strategy. So European Commission has been outlining measures member states can take to combat the rising prices of energies.
Right, and staying with energy prices then, well, actually moving beyond that, Professor Yi, what are your thoughts on the globe's campaign of going carbon neutral by the year 2050?
Yeah, I think that's something that we need to definitely do. But like what I said, it is always important to come up with a realistic plan to achieve such an ambitious goal. And this realistic plan should, I think, include the nuclear power as well as the right mixture of the renewable energies.
Right. All right, Professor Yi, thank you very much for your thoughts today. Professor Oh, as always, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure.